Where you're at right now doesn't matter all that much. Your future self matters a lot more than your current self. And so don't put too much stock into where you're at right now, because where you're at right now is very temporary. What matters more is your direction and your trajectory versus your current situation. If you've got a fixed mindset, then you're really worried about who you are right now. You overly define who you are right now, and you're upset that where you're at right now is not where you wish you were. Whereas if you have a growth mindset, you really don't care that much about where you're at right now, because you know you're moving forward. You're advancing forward, you're taking steps forward daily, and you know that momentum's kicking in. And so the goal is to not be that worried about where you're at right now, but instead to keep your focus fixed on your future self, to be grateful for where you're at right now, and to continuously be measuring your progress backwards. The only person you can reasonably measure yourself against is your former self. That's what Dan Sullivan calls being in the gain. When you're in the gain, you look at where you are versus where you used to be. And as Ernest Hemingway said, there's nothing noble about being superior to other people. If you're trying to be superior to other people, then you're comparing and competing, and chances are you're trying to run the wrong race. If you're measuring yourself against your former self, then that's how to be healthy. You're saying, this is where I'm at right now, this is where I used to be, I can see I'm making progress, now where do I ultimately want to go? And so that's the key, is taking steps forward, really enjoying the process, but obviously being committed to your future, and not worrying so much about your current situation. It's like the stock market, for example. If you look at it every single day, unless you're a day trader, you're just gonna be upset by the current situation. It's gonna cause so much stress and anxiety. It's also like planting a plant. Like if you're constantly pulling the plant out and seeing if it grew rather than letting it grow, you've got to be confident in your future self. You've got to be confident that the steps you're taking right now are moving forward. Also, if you are taking daily actions towards your future self, you can expect success. One of the things you want to ultimately do is define the difference between what's important and what's urgent. What's important is your future self. What's urgent is your current self. And so you want to take action on a daily basis towards your future self. Ideally, at the beginning of your day, you have 1 to 3 priorities, 1 to 3 things that you focus on, and they're tangible, result-oriented things. Making progress on that product or on that manuscript or whatever it is. Taking actual steps, eating the frog, as Mark Twain and others would say. Taking steps, accomplishing outcomes, and then letting it go, and knowing that you're going to get there. You can obviously get more and more aggressive towards your future self. You can invest more, you can really take action. But if you're constantly comparing and competing with other people who may be further along than you, then you're always going to be unhappy and unsatisfied with where you're currently at. Now, it's actually fine to not be that worried about where you're currently at, but you can be happy all along the way, and you can expect success because you know that along the future you're going to become a different version of yourself. There's a great quote from Ira Glass. Ira Glass talks about what he calls the gap, and this is different from Dan Sullivan's gap and gain, but what Ira Glass talks about is that for someone who wants to become a good creative of some sort, they've got to realize there's a big gap between where they want to be and who they're at right now. And the only way to bridge that gap is by doing a lot of work. It's just like the pottery experiment where the professor had his students, there was one group of students that he had them just build a ton of pots. The other one, he asked them to make the perfect pot. So they tried to make one pot, whereas this group, they literally made like hundreds of pots. And through the process of making hundreds of pots, they really got good at making pots. Whereas the other group, because they were trying so hard to be perfect, they never ended up making a great pot. And so what Ira Glass talks about, and he says this is the thing that ultimately stops most people from moving forward, is that when you're starting out, you can see the huge gap between the work you're making right now and the quality of your taste. You've got good taste, which is why you wanted to do what you're doing in the first place, but you can see that you're not quite there yet, and that's where most people stop. Whereas if you just did a massive volume of work, and you were committed to your future self, you were focused on your future self, you were developing skills, abilities, and you weren't overly worried about your current self. You weren't overly worried about the imperfections of your current work. In fact, Dan Sullivan has a concept he calls the 80% rule, where you get better and better at getting to 80% and being confident with 80%. Because if you're trying to go to 100%, then you're still just trying to over-perfect it and you're not getting things done. Whereas if you just worry about getting it to 80% and releasing it, then you'll get better and better at getting to 80%. And the 80% that you make in the future will be beyond 100% what you can do. It's like the pots, making more and more. And so don't be overly worried about where you're at right now. Be happy with where you're at right now. Focus on your future self and know that your position right now matters so much less than your trajectory and your direction. And no one else has the same trajectory or direction as you, so there's no point in comparing with other people. You can learn from other people, you can be inspired by other people, you can even compete with other people if you want to some degree, but that's only gonna muddle your path a little bit. Instead, you measure against your former self and you move forward, and you just know that if you keep at this, you're going to ultimately be in a much different place. You're also going to be doing a much different quality of work. That's one thing that just naturally takes care of itself, is if you keep producing, keep learning, keep going through that process of what psychologists call deliberate practice, then it's okay if the work you're creating right now isn't that great. Because you know, for example, if you're a blogger, you know that in 100 blog posts, your blogs are going to be enormously different and better. That's the whole idea, that your future self is going to be embarrassed by the work you're creating right now, just like your current self may be embarrassed by who you were 12 months ago. That's a quote from Alain de Botton. He said, if you're not embarrassed by who you were 12 months ago, you didn't learn enough. Obviously, it's not necessarily healthy to be embarrassed, but you can see a huge transformation of who you are now versus who you were. And even looking at your former self's work and even your former self's viewpoints, you can see a radical distinction between how you see the world and how you approach things. And so if you're someone who's going through lots of volume, and if you're working really hard, and if you're more focused on your trajectory and your direction, and you're not so worried about who you are right now, then you're allowing your current self to be much more flexible. You're being less rigid, and you're allowing your future self to guide the ship, which is what you ultimately want to do. You want your future self to guide the ship. You want your current self to be flexible. You want to know that in the future, the things you're going to be producing are so much better than where you're at right now. And you're okay with that. You're okay putting out imperfect work because you know, for example, in 50 blog posts from now, or in 3 months of working on this project, when you look back, you're going to see things totally different. You know your future self is going to be looking at things different. You know that they're going to have a better perspective. You know they'll be able to do better work than you right now. And so you just allow that to be the fun part. That allows work to be fun, because then you can just start cranking and producing, and you know that it's by the process of creating, it's by the process of doing, that you ultimately get really, really good at what you do. And that then excites you to just cruise through the process, to create more and more, to be in a more volume state, and to be less attached to the outcome, at least the temporary outcome. You're still committed to the future self, but you're not attached at all to the outcomes along the way. You could produce 100 different things, and you're not worried about the results. You're not worried about what people think, because you're not defined by these ones. You're defined by your future self, and you know your future self will be producing things much better than your current self, which gives you the freedom and the flexibility to fail right now. And that's ultimately what you need. That's what Kobe Bryant needed. He needed the freedom to fail, which he said was given to him by knowing that his father loved him and knowing that he could commit to a big picture. One of the other things that Dan Sullivan talks about that I think is brilliant is he commits to a 25-year vision. Now, you don't have to commit to a vision that big, but the reason he commits to a vision so far out is he knows that if he has 25 years to do something, then he's probably going to get there. He's now taken out the stress of time. Now, obviously, on the opposite side, there's a lot of research that shows that time scarcity is one of the biggest motivators of actually taking powerful action. So you kind of want to have a big-term vision that allows you to just be at peace while giving yourself short-term deadlines so that you can be hyper-productive. At the end of the day, it's about where you want to go. It's about being at complete peace with yourself and your future self. And it's about enjoying the process and not being afraid of failure, not being afraid of what other people think of you, and really being a self-defined person where you define your future self. You're not overly shadowed by other people's opinions, and you become comfortable failing along the way. And you know that failure is the fastest way to learning. And it's not really failure, it's just rapid feedback. It's just feedback in the real world. So that's the key, is just enjoy where you're at right now, but don't be defined where you're at right now. And then use your future self and the excitement of where you're gonna go, and knowing that your future self is gonna be in such a different place, and also knowing that it's the process of doing that actually trains and transforms you to ultimately do a lot of the work you wanna do, to be willing to fail, to get lots of feedback, to get lots of learning, and then to watch and be blown away as you advance forward, and then as you look back, to be shocked at how far you came. You will be shocked at how far you came. You'll look back and you'll be shocked at the gains, and you'll measure those gains, which will allow you to feel joy and progress along the way, which joy and progress will enhance your hope, your motivation, your enjoyment in the present. It'll also boost your confidence towards pursuing bigger goals in the future. And it's all you gotta do is just enjoy the process while committing to the future. And then you'll just bust through a volume of work, and you'll be prolific, better prolific than perfect, and you'll get where you want to go, and you'll be shocked at how fast you go. So I'm Dr. Benjamin Hardy. On this page right here, you can get access to the next Future Self video. The key point here is this. Your future self matters a lot more than your current self. Your current self is temporary. Don't be overly worried about where you're at right now. Your future self is where you can get to if you commit, if you focus on action and not just being passive. And if you're fine failing along the way because you're not attached to the outcomes along the way, you're not defined by what your former self did. You're defined by who your future self is. You will go fast. Please like the video, please subscribe, and I'll see you on the next video.